Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Monetizing Your Mental Capital. I'm your host, Will Christensen, and I have Ryan Terko here. Ryan, we're going to dive right in. And the question that I have for you is, why is an e-commerce seller who may be considering the idea of monetizing mental capital, getting into this space of services or building a service-based business or just anything that doesn't require a physical good? Why would someone like that want to hear from you?
I would probably say experience first and foremost. I have a wealth of experience on both sides of that, both as a retailer and as a consultant.
Okay.
Done both. Both has its advantages, both has its disadvantages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've been on both sides of that coin before, successfully creating an Amazon business and then shifting to the mental capital side of things.
Correct. Yeah. Ran an 8-figure Amazon business for almost 10 years, I would say. Multiple marketplaces worldwide, probably 8 to 10 marketplaces worldwide. Did brand management during that time as well. Just ended up having to build out a pretty big infrastructure to support all of that. And then, obviously the bigger you get, the more money you need for inventory. And it just was always chasing that need for more capital to support more inventory.
So you've walked this walk. When's the first time you can remember monetizing mental capital?
Ooh, we're going to have to go back. I've always been an opportunist slash pragmatist, I guess is probably the best way to say that. Always looking for an opportunity to maximize my capitalistic nature. I don't know. I would say probably 2 years into running my Amazon business is when I think I finally realized I actually had some mental capital that was worth something to others.
Interesting.
So I've been on the hustle for a very long time, but if we're looking at it from the perspective,
no, tell me, let's go back to that. Tell me, what did that look like?
I first time I had a job, I think I was 10 years old. So, I've always been, looking to earn money and be self-sustaining, since a very young age. I had a paper route. And then before I was even legally allowed to work, I, was doing random jobs for different people. Then throughout high school, I did general contracting work. And, even when I was in high school, I had 2 jobs while I was going to high school. After I graduated high school, I was doing I actually had scholarship offers for college, and I was done. I couldn't do it anymore.
Couldn't do any more school.
Yeah, I was doing AP classes. I had 5 college credits before I even graduated. And I was so burnt out between doing all that plus working 30, 40 hours a week on top. I was just, doing it. Every second I had, I made use of. So I got kind of burnt.
So that's monetizing time. And I agree that there's mental capital that you have to put into that time. Were any of those, when do you remember doing that so that you were able to do it for yourself versus having to work for someone else?
Well, that's what I was saying. I was saying probably about 2 years into when I had started the Amazon business.
Okay.
That's when I realized that I had enough knowledge and expertise in a growing market that I could monetize that by selling it to someone else. As you know, Amazon is a beast. And if you're not very familiar with it, it will roll right over you and crush you and drain your wallet. And you will be left soulless and sitting on the side of the road scratching your head. So a lot of brands, they want to get the most out of Amazon. They want to get the most out of marketplaces in general, but it's a new beast. Nobody really knew how to handle it. We were doing it very successfully already. So we decided to kind of leverage that. And my brother and I, we were originally partners. we decided to leverage that into exclusive relationships with brands.
Mm.
Yeah.
So in that situation, the monetization of the mental capital was the gap you could see in brands that needed your help.
Yeah, so it was helping brands. First, at this point, Amazon was still a smaller blip on the radar, I guess you would say. It hadn't really, it was more like, brands were more like, about Amazon, more so, much more so than they are today, where they look at it as a viable channel that they want to grow their brand with. Back then, it was kind of like, if we have to. So helping them understand the potential of that market and then helping them maximize it as well.
So where was the leverage point? Like as you began to monetize that mental capital and kind of look at, okay, I'm going to build a business off of this. Generally, as I discuss the idea of monetizing mental capital, there's some sort of gap and leverage point, something where this becomes so. So, for example, we were just on with Kevin King,
Mhm.
and Kevin was mentioning the first time he monetized his mental capital was when he went to Texas A&M and he actually created a jam session study course that he would charge $15 for the people who were taking this basic computing class, because the teachers weren't actually doing a good job of teaching you how to pass the test. And so the failure rate was like off the charts. So he charged $15 for this jam session. And he said he got it to the point where there were 300 to 500 kids a night coming to the Hyatt Hotel to do his $15
Wow.
jam session. So like he was making, and this was in the 80s. So like he was making $9,000 a night that, a couple times a semester, every time right before the test, a jam session to help them learn what they needed to learn to pass the test. And so for him, the leverage point, and this was kind of the fascinating moment. There's a Sunshine Act in Texas where names and addresses of individuals who are enrolled in a certain course are public domain. So he went to the registrar's office and asked for those labels, and then basically had a list of 1,000 students that he could mail his flyer to. And he just, that was the leverage point, right? All of a sudden he had access to the audience. I'm curious for you, where in this journey did you have a leverage point that created an opportunity for you to actually distribute and turn this into a business versus just a hobby?
So I would say the leverage point I had, or that I basically created, was educating the brands that we were working with on the benefits of having the channel managed versus just letting it roll as it was. Most brands at that point in time were just kind of letting it be. Whatever happened, happened. There wasn't really a concept built yet around maximizing the channel, growing the channel, and looking at it as a viable option. So we would basically convince them that it was best to clear out competition from the table, allow us to then take over the sale of that product or that brand.
So all of a sudden, every single large brand that was on Amazon that was being sold by random arbitrageurs became a silver platter to some degree for you, because you could reach out to them. Like that was your list of people to reach out to and be like, look, you could be making XYZ more if you'll let us help you brand register, kick off all the people who are doing the arbitrage thing, and help you actually represent your own brand there. And all we want is a cut.
Yeah, actually, that was even before there was such thing as brand registry. Yeah, brand registry didn't even exist at that point in time. That's how far back like we're going here. Probably talking 2015, 2014. Yeah, probably 2015, 2014. So Amazon as its own unique viable channel wasn't even really on most people's radar, let alone brands. So
Interesting.
I saw a massive opportunity. It was very clear where the market was heading, and we maximized that.
Yeah. So, just barely jumped off the episode with Kevin King. So the other thing he was saying is this market's massive. There's like 800 some odd sellers who are signing up every day to sell. And not all of them are obviously selling, but fascinating to see the speed at which that was growing, and you were finding the established brands who needed help controlling the experience and then creating a solid experience for everybody.
Yeah, because as everybody knew when Amazon, first started getting its legs, brands really had a point of contention with price point. Price point was a major issue. So we actually developed a monitoring software for MAP that also dealt with notifying sellers. So, another leverage point we had is that brands who had been struggling with maintaining a price point, within a few months of working with us, we had them at 95% compliance.
Nice. And that was just through notifying the brand, the individuals who were coming in under, like, no, you've got to be at this price. You can't undercut it.
Yeah, we had it all automated too. So it was automated tracking of prices and automated notifications to those sellers. Now,
Beautiful.
then obviously Amazon got hip to that game and basically put the kibosh on that. I'd say probably 2018, where they completely changed the messaging platform. But we made very good use of what we had there for quite some time.
Interesting. So, I mean, as you dug in and saw, those opportunities, what would you say were the moments when you realized that, what were the questions you were asking yourself to figure out what you could monetize?
Basically, looked at that on a brand by brand basis and identifying, other potential markets as well globally where I thought the brands could also be successful. So it wasn't even just US based, it was also international, UK, Canada, generally the EU.
Right.
So that was other points where we looked to help them grow and expand revenue. We also built revenue around digital content creation as well. So developing, A+ content, product images, things like that. We had a photo studio. So, every which way that we could manage to monetize what we were doing, we pretty much found a way to do so.
So tell me about when you decided to take the leap and go from a physical product that you had to, keep track of inventory and all of that investment. And we're like, okay, I'm doing this service thing. I'm shifting.
Yeah. So I would say that shift happened, I would say probably about 4 to 5 years ago. Retail was something that before I'd gotten into Amazon, I had little to no experience with at all. And I guess, getting into it, I wasn't really cognizant of the fact that it was going to require more capital. The more you grew, the more capital you needed to grow. So, we were constantly chasing money in order to support the growing inventory need. And I just sat back and realized, how can I go about this differently and still have the same impact as what I'm doing currently? And that's when I decided to make that shift and get away from the retail side, move into brand management side strictly. So basically still doing the same thing, still doing the brand management, but instead of having to build out a big infrastructure to support inventory and warehousing, set the brands up to do it themselves.
Got it. So
Yeah.
you were doing, it sounds like in that situation, you figured out, okay, I can make money helping brands grow and I'll be their exclusive reseller. But you were doing all of the inventory side of it as well. And at some point you looked at it and said, okay, I don't love the inventory side. So what if I just removed the inventory side and I'll continue to manage the brands?
Right.
That's just their problem to figure out the inventory side of it.
Right. Right. So I just, getting into Amazon as strictly a retailer wasn't something that, I didn't want to be everyone else. I wanted to do it differently, have a value add that, when push comes to shove, and brands decide to make changes or make cuts, we're doing something there to maintain our position with them.
So what is it what did you do to your service, to your mental capital that makes you different from some of those others that are out there that'll manage that side of the business?
I have an incessant need to win. Bottom line, I do not fail. And I think every client that I have ever taken on would agree with that. So, been doing brand management now for 9 years. I have never once during this entire period had a client who did not renew their initial agreement with me. So I insist on winning. I don't take on every client that comes my way. I vet each brand for potential to succeed. If I think it's viable and we can help them, we bring them on. And if not, then we maybe direct them to somebody else who might be a better option. But I think it's really important to know what you're dealing with going in and be able to see a path to help them succeed.
So I think that's interesting. One of the things that I've learned as well in my service-based business journey is not everybody's going to be a fit.
Right.
When I was trying to sell everything to everyone, I discovered very quickly that that didn't work. And that was a creek that the farther I paddled up selling everything to everyone or just helping everyone. Because at the beginning, I was, ramen noodling it, right? Like I was trying to feed myself and figure out all the above. So I was like, oh, you'll pay me money? Yeah, I'll do that. Wait, oh, what was it you wanted me to do? Like,
Yep.
like I was just chasing those dollars to cover the nut. And I learned pretty quickly that there was a cost to every project I brought on, but the costs weren't all equal. I would get paid the same amount of money, but the cost for me to learn how to handle that service or dig into that varied dramatically. So the more experience I had in it, the less cost there was. But I wasn't paying attention to that. All I was paying attention to was the top line.
Yeah.
And maybe I was even paying attention to how much the freelancers would cost. And those costs generally stayed similar. The cost I wasn't paying attention to was my own, because it was, that's my time. Tracking that's hard. And, there's all those different pieces. And so I just went and did everything for everybody. But it wasn't until I figured out, no. Doing the same thing over and over and over again that you have a ton of expertise in, that's how you scale something that actually becomes something. Because if I can figure out how to charge $100 for 2 minutes of my time, well, that's something, and it's the same 3 hours of a VA's time to manage that, but it's 2 minutes of my time to analyze the situation. Okay, now I can sell that over and over and over again, and I've got a widget that's actually productized. But it wasn't until I figured out how to do that I got stuck. Was that similar for you?
Very much so. Yeah, I mean, everybody I think who gets into this business suffers from founder syndrome up until a point.
Founders syndrome. I love that.
Founder syndrome, where obviously you're going to do it better than anybody else you're going to give the job to. The problem with that is it's not scalable and it's not sustainable. You need to be able to work within your business, not be the business. I built the business up, but I did so with a bit of humility involved and understanding that I needed to be able to step back and trust the people that I hired to do the job. Very, very few people that I've talked to felt comfortable leaving their business in the hands of somebody else for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I never had that. I never suffered from that after the first couple years. After the first couple years, the first couple years was those ramen years, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Once I had built it up and I had put good people in place and trained them on what my expectations were, I could leave town for a couple of weeks to go on a vacation or go hit a conference or do this or do that. And I after talking to a number of people, a number of them said that they did not have that same level of comfort.
Yeah. So Ryan, tell me, all right, so let's say that I run an Amazon business now. I've got it to the point where that's basically running. I'm recognizing that I want to diversify my portfolio. I want to go build this service-based business. And I recognize that there's going to be some ramen, right? There's going to be some ramen time and I'm probably taking money from Peter to pay Paul. I'm taking money from my brand on Amazon to fund the creation of what's there. So that's either money that I've stockpiled, or maybe I took some investment or whatever. How many months of stockpile, how many months of ramen would you recommend I have on hand in order, like if I'm going to go jump off that cliff? Because my mistake, and I think had I had it to do over, and actually so now one of the things I'm doing outside of Seller Labs is I clone entrepreneurs. And I do that by finding them young, excited entrepreneurial talent, and that's like pre-ready. And then I pair them with entrepreneurs that are overwhelmed. I call it cloning, like I mentioned, entrepreneurs. In starting that business, I started it alongside my other businesses that were there, and I brought an apprentice in, and I worked the process for like 3.5 years. So it was not my primary source of income for a long time in the background. And part of the reason I did that is because I never wanted to be beholden. I didn't want to go back to those ramen times of like, oh yeah, I'll hire a VA out of the Philippines for you, even though what I'm best at is entrepreneurial talent here in the States who can clone you, who can become you. That's what I'm good at. I didn't want to get to a place where it was like, okay, either I feed my family and hire the VA that's not my forte, because that's not what I bring on. They're not VAs. I wanted to focus on the one, like this is my space. This is my niche. This is where I focus. And so that was how I protected myself from my ramen self, right? I protected myself from the desperation of feeding my family by letting this start in the background. And it wasn't until I figured out both sides, both recruiting apprentices and recruiting mentors to join, that I've now, and this is actually very recent, over the next couple of months, it's becoming my primary source of income. Okay. And that's because we've gotten to the place where we have enough apprentices, and I figured out enough sides to the two-sided marketplace to identify and figure out what's there. But I was very careful to go in there. And honestly, I was terrified of making it because, well, what if I did it wrong? Or what if I really hadn't figured out both sides and then I was stuck in the ramen boat again? So my curiosity for you is, and I'm asking myself the same question, how many months of revenue or months of my own nut do you think that I need to have available so that I can comfortably not do everything for everyone over in this other category? Well, if you were to say, hey, Mr. Seller, if you're going to go do that, you're going to go make a business that does AI image generation for listings. Who knows? Whatever that service is that they're convinced there's a gap in the marketplace. How many months do they need to have covered, either by their e-commerce business or in a stockpile, to not like to figure out how to turn that engine on?
I mean, that's a very relative question. I would say don't try to get into something. Don't, listen to this podcast and then just go out and decide you want to create a services business when all you've ever done on Amazon is buy and sell product.
Sure.
It's not going to happen. So, it's got to be something that you have a wealth of knowledge behind, a wealth of experience behind, and you see the potential to monetize it. So
first you would say, before even jumping off that cliff, make sure you have enough of a depth of knowledge in what you're doing that you can actually create a moat and like actually build a business. So I love that. Okay. Step one, make sure you've got that depth of knowledge. Step two, how much do I need? How long do I need to sustain myself, do you think, to kind of figure out, for the average idea?
I would say, safely assuming, entity established, you get all the basics out of the way, logo, name, domain, website, all that, to where you can just focus on customer acquisition. You're probably looking somewhere between 6 and 12 months.
I agree.
Yeah. 6 and 12 months is that number that you will need to generate something to make it offset your costs.
And I would say if you're trying to do a two-sided marketplace like what I'm doing, where I have apprentices that I'm trying to recruit and entrepreneurs that I want to recruit as mentors and pair them, I basically took me 3.5 years. Now, granted, that was in the background. I wasn't doing it full time, all of what's there. But I'd even say you might want to throw an extra 6 to 12 months on that, or the other side of the marketplace if you have to go recruit, because you're trying to solve two problems, right?
I would say the caveat there would be, if you're creating a market, then you are probably looking at 24 to 36. But if you're filling a need in an existing market and it's a need that people know that they have,
there you go.
Between a need that people don't know that they need yet, and that they know they need.
100%
difference between those two things.
Well, if it's a tangible need versus one of those needs that they're like, wait, what is that? Like if someone's like, excuse me, you sell that, where do I buy? Like that tangible need, that I think you could even have 2 months of revenue and you're in a lot of places, especially if you know where to find the people, right?
Yep.
So wealth of knowledge, have the idea. Now, do you have a way to get in touch with those people? I think is another thing that you've got to kind of consider. Because if you don't have a way to get in touch with those, that's what we're talking about, 6 to 12 months. You're going to go figure out how to get those people. But if you have the idea and you also know that it's the wealth of knowledge, you've also identified that this wealth of knowledge relates to a dire need people know they have, and the audience part is figured out. I mean,
you're good.
Throw those things in and you've got some real traction real fast, and you don't need as much. But the weaker each one of those parts are, and I would say if you lack the wealth of knowledge, like that's the whole monetization of mental capital. So you either got to go find somebody who's got that knowledge and bring it with them, or you've got to figure out how to get it. And I would probably do that before you ever jump. Like you're saying, like before you jump, that's got to happen. But then beyond that, identify where the need is, and you've got to add 6 to 12 months per thing that you haven't figured out.
Yeah, I mean, I have a number of clients who I don't even touch their Amazon account. I don't even touch their Amazon business. They retain my services just for roadmap and direction, just because I have that knowledge and that experience, and I know how to navigate certain situations that come up. They retain my services just for that. I had a call with somebody earlier today who talked me through something that they literally spent 5 hours doing yesterday. And once they got done telling me what they were doing, I told them, well, that was completely unnecessary because you didn't need to do it. And at the end of the day, they ended up spending 5 hours of their day doing something that they thought they needed to do, but they didn't actually need to do, and was no longer a thing.
Yep.
So,
and that's that depth of knowledge, right? So you having that depth of knowledge, you make sure that they don't ever spend that 5 hours again because they've connected with you. And that's that depth of knowledge that you're bringing to the table and connecting those dots. I could not agree more for those different pieces. We're going to shift the conversation here just a little bit. Ryan, let's imagine that I hand you a cell phone. And that cell phone, it's actually one of those old Nokia block, 2000 something phones. Yeah, we handed you that cell phone and you pick it up and you realize you've got Ryan on the line from way back when you just began monetizing your mental capital. And you can tell him anything you want about monetizing his mental capital. What would you tell him to do differently? Now you'd be that much farther in your journey. If you could call him on the phone and give him a heads up, what would you tell him?
I would probably say, as much as you don't want to do this, or as much as you may want to do this, don't ever take somebody's word for something. Get it in writing.
So contracts,
just written agreements. Had a lot of conversations with people at the beginning, did work for people on handshake and trust, and because that's just me. I am a dependable person, and when I tell you I'm going to do something, I do it. And I quickly realized that that a lot of people do not subscribe to that school of thought.
Shoot. So I love that. And I'm going to add to that a little bit. So imagining that we were having a conference call with Ryan and you said that, I would say, Ryan, really what it boils down to is minimizing your risk with those that you haven't seen perform already.
Yeah, I mean that, or don't invest in something if you're not guaranteed something on the other end. Don't invest
Okay.
time and energy into something without some guarantee of a return on the other side.
So what are some of the ways that you've minimized that risk or gotten that guarantee on the other side? Is it just, having it in writing? Or is it a contract? What have you done to minimize some of those risks?
Yeah, I mean, contractually is one of the ways that I've done that, but also just setting hard lines and boundaries. Like, look, this is what I can do for you. This is how I can help.
Mhm.
This is what we charge to help. If that seems good to you, then let's get something done. And if not, then I can maybe suggest somebody else to you.
Yeah.
But that's just where we are. Whereas before, I might have just started getting into it and tried to show my value to the client before having anything locked in. When you know I've built enough equity at this point, or I've built enough solid examples of success that I don't have to do that anymore.
Beautiful. So it sounds like what, where the hang up in that process is around identifying individuals you can trust. I think that's a big part of that. But I think so for me, I have individuals that I trust enough that an email exchange or a Slack
Yeah,
notification is enough.
yeah,
As long as, but I found even with those guys that you trust the most, like business partners, write it down.
yep.
And don't write it down. Like a text message is probably not sufficient because you swap out that cell phone every 2 years. Like,
Email.
like get an email, write it out and say, hey, this is what we talked about on the phone. I just wanted to get this written down so that because our memories are faulty, we tend to kind of just remember whatever we think is easiest. Like, how do we kind of look at that? And for me, doing that now has saved me tons of headache where early I lost
Hmm.
a fair amount of money and equity
Yep.
because I didn't write it down.
Yeah, definitely had some larger clients who put somebody in charge of managing that part of the business. They were basically like the liaison for the company, and that company, at the end of the day, after a long period of substantial growth, seemed to have a completely different perception of how things went than how they actually went. So not having written communications around how things were transpiring, and certain things that were stated verbally that were not written. I didn't have anything to fall back on, and that was the point when I quickly realized, like, okay, I had just been taken advantage of.
Yeah.
Is leveraged to make somebody else look good.
Yeah.
They basically downplayed my ability.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I think making sure that your involvement is very clear above board and that everything's written in those expectations, I think is key. The
Yes.
other thing that I have found is it's okay to give ranges. I didn't think it was in contracts or different pieces of what was there. I felt like, no, you have to know. But I found that over time, like even equity percentages for different ventures, I will often go into a joint venture agreement with someone and I will put in equity ranges. Hey, I expect to own 15 to 60% of this business at the end of it, and you expect to own, 85 to 40% when we're done. And that's going to depend on who puts in more work in these different stages. We don't know enough for what's there. And I found that those boundaries help you have a discussion that are really powerful to kind of minimize some of that risk.
Yeah, especially in partnerships. Partnerships can be real tricky And one thing you want to do in a partnership above anything else is always make sure everyone is on the same page. And you want to make sure that every communication that you have along those lines is written, as we previously discussed. Because, one person thinking one thing and then the other person thinking something different, everybody intended the same thing, completely different perspectives of that one conversation can spell disaster very quickly.
Last thing I want to say on this, and then I've got our final questions for the podcast. One way that I've minimized some of that risk is by collecting money up front and getting my piece of the pie, half of it sooner, to kind of look at those different pieces. So if I have somebody that I don't know that well, and this is more in a client arrangement or client agreement,
right?
One way that you can minimize some of that risk is by covering your costs in that first payment, right? Like, if it's a $10,000 project and your cost on the project is $5,000, you probably should collect that $5,000 up front. And then at a bare minimum, you've covered your costs if they screw you over and walk away. And, and I even will turn it into payments where at a milestone in the project, I need to get another 2,500, and then and so it kind of helps spread that risk out versus you finish the $10,000 project and now it's like, hey, I want to check for 10,000, and they're like, oh, see ya, and you're like, I just lost 5K.
Yeah,
and all the time I spent on it.
So in those situations, like we definitely any physical asset that we create for someone is not released until that physical asset is paid for.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Learn how to watermark your content creation.
Yep.
And you will ensure you get paid for it every time.
Well, 100% hear you. So the last part of this podcast, we ask you two things. Imagining that you stepped into an elevator with your ideal customer profile, with like an Amazon seller, 8-figure seller, owns their own brand. Let's imagine you stepped into an elevator and you got 60 seconds to basically tell them a little bit about why your business. And then right after that, I'm going to have you give any tips, tricks, hacks, or books you've come across in the last year that have helped you upscale your mental capital.
So first of all, one thing that always works very well for me is I don't take that 60 seconds to talk about me. I take that 60 seconds to understand how I can help you, to understand what your problems are, what your challenges are, what you're facing, and what you need to get past these things.
I like it.
That's what I take those 60 seconds to do. If you want to know my credentials, they're on LinkedIn. I happy to share that with you too if you want, but I feel like it's more important to understand what that client needs more so than telling them what I can offer them.
So what are some of the problems that I might be facing as a client that you could help me with?
Lack of growth, not enough internal bandwidth to focus on Amazon like you want to, don't understand how to deal with advertising, don't have anybody to do any digital content creation, haven't even started an Amazon account yet, want to know what it is to sell on Amazon. I mean, there any range from, not having a brand on Amazon to having a very well established, large, CPG brand.
Love it. Brian, I think that's solid. All right. Any tips, tricks, hacks, or books you've come across in the last year that have helped you upscale your ability to monetize mental capital?
7 Habits of Highly Successful People, not in the last year, that and Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill. Those 2 books right there, I think were paramount in helping me get where I am today.
I love it. Ryan, thank you for joining us on Monetize Your Mental Capital. That's it for today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.